changes are occurring today in primary and secondary education that can positively transform schools, districts, and communities. Today, our guests will share from their perspective and experience as educators, from their voices of faith as ministers, activists, to transform education for the glory of God. Please stay tuned. Someone else that came out for the glory of God. Welcome to the show. I'm Karen Crozier, host of Perspectives on Faith and Culture, and today joining me are Jessica Mass, who is an educator teacher at Kepler Neighborhood School. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you.
As well as Summer Vu, who is a teacher at Fresno Unified School District. Welcome to the show, Summer.
Thank you.
As educators, activists, and ministers, Jessica, let's begin with you. What was your interest into public education or into the education arena?
So I come to education kind of by way of ministry. I was a biblical studies major in college at Fresno Pacific, and I was involved in camp ministry for a number of years and a youth pastor at my church, a small Mennonite congregation. And it happened that I was a substitute teacher as well. I was just picked it up as kind of a job to pay the bills and something that I didn't feel like I would need to invest a lot in. I was obviously proven wrong, but I was a substitute teacher for Tioga Middle School for about 2 months, and I found that in that 2-month period with the same 7th grade class, I was able to make connections there that just were different somehow than the connections I had made with my kids in the youth group, with my students in the summer camps. There was something different about that day-to-day relationship with the students rather than seeing the students twice a week or once a year. And so I came to understand that maybe my vocation in ministry and the way that I was going to do God's work in the world was through education. So something outside the church where I had kind of assumed I would find God's work for me, but education became it. So through substitute teaching was the avenue.
Wow. And Summer, what was your interest into the profession of education?
So, not born as a Christian and converted as a Christian much later, I got interested in teaching because of my childhood experience. I came to this country when I was 10, and I experienced a lot of hardship as a EL student. Didn't know a word of English when I came to the classroom, and there weren't a lot of help. A lot of children like me or students like me had to struggle. It was either sink or swim, and so as I saw the struggles and experienced personally at firsthand, it motivated me to become a teacher. In addition to that, the people who really had an influence in my life were also teachers too. I had at least 3 teachers in my life that, came to my rescue when I needed so much help. And then I later on became a mother. In my teenage years, I became a mother. And at the time, it just seemed like becoming a teacher would just be a good fit for my lifestyle and what I wanted to do to help other children, so that I could possibly reduce some of the struggles that I had personally. And then later on, as I discovered God and become a Christian, it just made that much more sense to do what I do as a profession, as a teacher.
So yeah, you brought that. He was bringing that compassion and making it more alive in that process. And it seemed like, Jessica, that was part of your experience too with the relational connection. In light of that, Summer, you sort of highlighted some of the challenges you experienced as a student in education. Can you identify 1 or 2 other challenges that's going on in public education today from your perspective?
The challenges that I faced as a child and then even today is the lack of support. Like for example, in the classroom, teachers have between, I would say, 25 to 34 to 38 students in the classroom. And that's a lot of students with one person. And so students don't have that one-on-one experience anymore. At least when I was growing up, students had a teacher assistant in the classroom. Nowadays, we have nobody except the teacher. So that is a struggle, not having someone to help the teacher to give that one-on-one experience with the students. Another struggle is that we still have children who do not speak English as a first language, and yet we have no more bilingual tutors in the classroom, and we have no more home liaisons at the schools. So when parents can't speak to teachers and they can't speak to administrators, students can't speak to their teacher and they can't express what they would need or what they don't understand, you know, that's a disadvantage. That's a disadvantage to the child because we're dealing with people, human lives in education.
Right, and all children deserve.
All children deserve equal access and equal opportunity to, you know, a quality education.
Yes. And Jessica, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced in your time as an educator?
I think the one challenge that really sticks out to me is the issue of discipline. I think discipline has been an issue, I would imagine, for as long as school has been in session, for as long as education has been a part of our society. Where I see the discipline system failing our students right now is that I would say both teachers and administrators are very, very quick to go to the harsh discipline measures. So we're quick to suspend, we're quick to expel, and we're quick to say, what can I do to get the student out of my classroom? In my school at Kepler, we are really, we're striving to go against that temptation. We're striving to go against that kind of paradigm that's been put in place. And I think what I notice with my students even is they expect that to be the system. They expect that to be normal, that if they're causing some trouble, they're going to get shipped out of my classroom right away. They're going to get suspended right away. They're going to be expelled right away. And so I think we are doing our best to undo that kind of normalcy in the teacher's own minds and in the students' own minds as well. And so what that discipline model does then is it really negates any value of relationship. We at Kepler we've started with our restorative discipline model. I know that's something that Fresno Unified is switching over and making efforts to really get that as the new discipline paradigm. And what restorative discipline highlights is the relationship between student and teacher, between student and student, between administrator and student. And so instead of mostly punishment as the result of doing something that's not in line, it's restoring the relationship is what happens instead of the punitive justice kind of model. But the main issue I see with discipline is that it starts students off on a very difficult path very early in life, and they get used to this discipline model, this punitive justice system that then will just continue their whole life. So trying to stop that as early as possible, and restorative discipline, I think, offers us something different.
So share more in a lot of the ways that your faith informs you addressing the particular challenges that you have raised.
Dr. Crozier, can I make a comment what Jessica said about discipline first?
Please.
Okay. So I as a classroom teacher of 15 years, I like to beg to differ what Jessica has said about discipline. That teachers and administrators are quick to punish the child and expel or suspend. I would have to say that I disagree with that, because what teachers struggle with is this. You always have one or two students in the classroom that just disrupt the whole learning environment. And what has been happening right now, because of all the negative reactions to expulsion and to suspension, is that they don't want to suspend any children or to expel any children. So what they do is they home suspend these children with severe behavior issues. Now, mind you, as a teacher, and I'm not saying everybody is the same. I'm saying, there may be some teachers that are quick to remove a student out of the classroom, but that doesn't say that everybody does that. For me, by the time my student gets to the office, I would have exhausted everything out of my bag of tricks before I send that student to the classroom. And by the time we sent that student to the classroom, it was probably like 3 or 4 hours after, you know, the behavior, yes, the initial incidents. So our frustration as teachers in the classroom is that there's no productive programs to help mediate these behavior issues, because kids don't just act bad. You know, they have emotional issues, they have family issues, they have psychological issues, and you know, we don't have the right support to help these kids. So what we found is happening at the schools right now is when we send a student out to the office, they either sit in the office all day without any intervention, or they get put into another classroom to, you know, sit in there for just kind of like babysitting. And so that's our frustration. Our frustration as teachers is that, you know, we cannot allow one or two people to disrupt the entire learning environment for the other kids, and they ruin their future. And at the same time, people out there who really are against expulsion and suspension, and we're you know, we support that idea as well. We don't think that expelling kids and suspending kids is the answer, but there's no good program out there to help with these issues.
Right. And Jessica, how would you respond to that? Would you have a nuanced interpretation in light of Summer's response to you?
I think I very much agree. I think what's missing is that alternative program. So what else is in place? And I think that's what you're getting at. What else do we have in place for these students who, you're right, don't belong in the classroom setting at that particular moment where they are going through whatever it is internally they're going through. And often there's not enough relationship between teacher and student to get at that issue right away.
Because we have kids who are from foster care families. We have kids who have, they're being cared by their grandparents. We have kids who are from single parents. We have kids that, you know, parents are in prison or, you know, murdered or whatever tragedy that they come with, and they come with a lot of baggages too.
Right, so you're raising another challenge that we didn't necessarily name earlier, as far as the social emotional needs, as well as the supports of our the various different structures that our children come from the home, and schools are being overwhelmed in the process. And so when we return from the break, we're going to hear about how is your faith helping you to address these particular challenges that we have rightly named. We'll be back after the break.
KNXT TV is proud to say thank you to all its viewers who have given their support for over 25 years. And only through your support is KNXT able to provide spiritual and informative programming. Please remember KNXT in your long-term support through wills, bequests, trust, and plan giving. Your gift is important to the future of Catholic television. Help preserve the strength of KNXT's message based on the teachings of Christ. Keep KNXT in your future plans.
Welcome back to the show. I'm joined today by Jessica Mass, teacher at Kepler Neighborhood School, and Summer Vu, teacher at Fresno Unified School District. We were having a very exciting conversation concerning the challenges we identified within schools, for teachers, for districts. Now, how does your faith really speak to those? Jessica, let's begin with you.
So two things come to mind. First, I was trained through the Fresno Pacific Credential Program. I will always love Fresno Pacific, but our motto and our vision for credentialed teachers is that we approach teaching as a calling to redemptive service. So that idea of redemption in every interaction with every single student, with every discipline issue, as we're talking about, redemption is always kind of the key idea behind that. Second is what I grew up in. The faith I grew up in was Anabaptism. And Anabaptism has at its core this call to stay away from violence, whatever that looks like, whether that's physical violence, emotional, verbal, on a national scale. And so I think in me, in my own, the individual faith that I bring to my school, there's always a desire for redemption. There's a desire for that relationship to be made right, the broken things and the violence that causes those broken relationships to be brought back together. And that may sound very naive, But that is the key idea behind, I guess that's the key idea that keeps me going and keeps hoping for those relationships to be restored and for redemption to come as a result of whatever happens in the classroom when we talk about discipline.
So for the viewing audience who may not know what the term redemption means from our faith perspective, how would you clarify that for the viewing audience?
Yeah, I think redemption as the sense of what God does for us, what God does to us as humanity, redeeming us from brokenness and from lack of wholeness, from injustice, from oppression, all those broken pieces of the world, God is able to pull us from that into something more whole. And that's what I hope to see in our classrooms in Fresno, that we are taking those pieces that are broken, those pieces that don't fit together, and are creating chaos in our students' lives, that somehow we are able to provide a little bit of wholeness, even if that's in a block schedule that's for an hour a day, even if that means and this is where I would say I think the religious institutions of Fresno and the churches of Fresno have a huge role to play, because they are able to provide some of that wholeness as well. Whatever the chaos, whatever the situations our students are in, there are some of us who can provide a little bit of wholeness into that situation.
Thank you. Summer, how does your faith speak to the various challenges in your own personal and professional experience?
You know, teaching is probably one of the most challenging profession that I've ever experienced. And because we have, you know, children who comes from all walks of life, you know, from the background, and they come with a lot. It's you know, it's so unfair for these children to live in such chaos in their life, and then expect them to be a good student in school. As a child who grew up in a somewhat dysfunctional life, family life myself, and then facing all the challenges in my life, I always had to be mindful that these are children, and they deserve to be loved. As Jesus said to Simon, you know that I love you, and if you love me, then tend my sheep, tend to the sheep. And he also said, the greatest thing in everything we do is through love, and so I keep that in my heart, and I always try to remember that it's not the children's fault, and yes, we have to hold them accountable and teach them accountability and teach them how to become good human beings. But at the same time, we have to also teach them consequences so that they can learn to become good human beings. So as we challenge, the great challenges in the classroom, the biblical verses that I hold very dear to my heart about love and about acceptance and about love and forgiveness, these things keep me whole, and I'm able to continue to do what I do because of the teachings that I've learned from, knowing God.
I really appreciate the language you use as far as the human beings and how do we see each other as human and not seeing the child as the problem. And that becomes very important for not only that teacher who sees that student on a day-to-day basis, but also the administrators. How do we value the humanity? And so how can churches, Jessica, you sort of allude to that, how can churches be able to speak into that in supporting you as teachers and schools and districts to raise up the ways that we value all who live there as human beings? Summer, do you want to begin and answer that question?
The old saying that it takes a whole village to raise a child, and it's very true. And if we don't really take that to heart, then we need to, because it does. To raise a child and to really give a quality education, everybody has to hold everybody accountable. Parents have to hold teachers accountable. Teachers have to hold parents accountable. Parents and teachers have to hold the district leaders accountable. The government has to hold, teachers and parents and district leaders accountable. We all have to hold each other accountable so that we can give the best possible education to our children. I think everybody, or most citizens, and I'm talking about parents, I'm talking about not so much activists, because activists are always out there advocating. But the general public, I believe that everybody is tired, because when you work so hard in an 8-hour day, you come home and you just want to put your feet up. You have to feed your children. You have to, take care of your family in the evening, and you have to cook dinner, whatever. But we still need to pay attention to the school board meetings. We still need to pay attention to the decision that's made. We still need to pay attention to how school programs are being implemented and facilitated, and how money is being spent. I think for too long, citizens and civilians have allowed district leaders to decide how money are being spent. And they don't always know what children need. And so union leaders, parents, district leaders, the government even, nonprofit sectors, faith, communities, we all have to come together and say, look, these are our children and they're the future. This is what you have, these are the needs. Let's see how we can, meet the needs of our children and, make the best decision.
Thank you. Jessica, how would you speak to that as far as what religious institutions can do?
I think what I would do is take the conversation more to individual families' homes and individual neighborhoods. I know in my neighborhood there are many people working for the good of their neighbors and their neighbors' children. I know that when we talk about social emotional learning, that doesn't just happen in school. It doesn't happen just at home. There's a whole neighborhood that's involved in the formation of every student, of every child. There's a whole city that's involved in that. So what about the times that a kid is not at home or not in school? What about when they are on their street? What kind of socialization is happening there, and what are they learning kind of outside that traditional school environment? I think for me that's where people of faith in Fresno can really bring forth their gifts, the individual passions that they have to offer. In my neighborhood there is a local gym that's opened up where young men and women are teaching students how to do MMA. They're teaching them jiu-jitsu. They're providing another avenue and another place for socialization and learning, and providing some self-expression, providing some dignity, providing some ways for students to understand themselves as full people. And I think that's where the community comes in as a really important part of this whole picture. A student is not just their school self and their home self. Mm-hmm. There's a larger self going on here that has to do with the neighborhood you live in, the community that you're in, who you are outside that school and family. And I think that's where people of faith have a tremendous opportunity.
Right, so both of you speaking to a broader ecological, interconnected reality where we all need to be caring for one another. And as our biblical witness says, and Paul, bearing one another's burdens. Right. And I think that's beautiful what you captured in your own way. When we look at some of the changes that are happening around the local control funding formula, as well as Common Core standards and any other restorative practices, what do you see as some of the positive changes that can occur in light of this, these positive change, in light of these changes that can go for the positive, or if school districts are not focusing properly, it can be negative. Summer, 1 minute or less. What do you think? Yes, I know. 1 minute or less. What do you think can be some of the positives from those one or two of those particular?
So for a long time, school district leaders and union leaders, complain about how the terrible thing about money is that we don't have local control, and now we do. Now we have full local control on how to spend this money. And so one of the positive things is that finally we can say, this school has this great need, this school has this great need. This is how we're going to meet it by, putting the specific programs here and specific programs over here. But those decisions has to be made not only by school leaders, has to be made by teachers, parents, even students themselves. All the stakeholders has to be at the table, and they all have to make a joint decision how this money should be spent.
You did it in a minute and less. Jessica.
I'll speak to Common Core very, very briefly. I know Common Core is something that New teachers like me are very excited about. We feel like it offers us something different and more creativity and autonomy in our classrooms. I know that for veteran teachers, it's a very frightening thing. And I would say that the beauty and the challenge of Common Core is hopefully it will be a system that lets those two ends of the spectrum collaborate and learn from one another. So as I come in as a first-year teacher, I look to veteran teachers to know what have you been doing for these 10 and 15 years that I need to learn from. Hopefully, they're able to look at me and say, what have you learned in your training about Common Core that we can learn from? So I think it doesn't have to be frightening. It doesn't have to be our savior and the messiah of public education. Common Core is just a tool that will allow collaboration even further.
Wow, that's a nice way of framing it, that it's just a tool and not the end-all, be-all to what we think will bring us back up to a competitive level as a nation educationally. So in 30 seconds or less, what would you like the viewing audience to walk away with as we have had this very timely conversation on education and faith? Jessica, what would you like the viewing audience just to walk away with?
I think this goes back to what we spoke about earlier, that the reality is education is interconnected with everything else in a student's life. School is just one part of this bigger picture. And if we have people in faith, people of faith in Fresno who are for students, that means they're going to understand them outside of just being students in school. Who are these students in their communities? Who are these students in their neighborhood? And how can people of faith be in relationship with them? I think relationship is key. Education will be there. It can be positive, it can be negative, but what are the other factors around education that people of faith can enter into?
Thank you. 30 seconds or less, Summer?
I would like you to walk away with, let's become proactive instead of reactive. Let's all care about public education. Let's all care about the children. And let's all visit the school board meetings, and even if you can't, watch it on TV so that you know exactly what kind of decisions are made for the future of this community and this country.
We'd like to thank our guests today for being on the show, and you can catch Perspectives on Faith and Culture at KNXT.TV online, or watch it on Channel 49 KNXT on Thursdays at 8 p.m. and Fridays at 1 p.m. Thank you for watching. Take care, and God bless.